Today, I'm going to tell you 3 disturbing stories. But before we dive into those stories, if you like weird, dark, and mysterious things told in story form, you've come to the right place. That's what we do every week. So next time you come, hit the like button then, hit subscribe, and turn on all notifications so you never miss an upload. Now, let's get to today's stories. At exactly 10 p.m. on January 31st, 2012, a 23-year-old man named Kevin Liang walked into an internet cafe in New Taipei City, Taiwan. The cafe had a front counter where a cashier checked people in, sold snacks and drinks, and beyond the counter, rows upon rows of glowing computer screens. Dozens of gamers were already there, lost in their virtual worlds, heads down, headphones on. No one looked up when Kevin walked in, and honestly, Kevin liked it that way. He preferred the anonymity, the ability to sit quietly, disappear into the screen, and lose himself in his game. So he paid for a few hours, bought a soda, and wandered toward the back. He found an empty station, sat down, and loaded up his favorite game, League of Legends. Kevin was a serious player. This wasn't just casual gaming for him, it was routine. He'd often spend 8, 10, even 12 hours straight, grinding matches, climbing the ranks, chasing perfection. And tonight was no different. Once the game launched, he locked in and went to war. Hours ticked by. Occasionally, he'd get up to refill his soda or grab a snack, but mostly he just played, non-stop. He even power-napped between matches, head down on the desk for 15 minutes, only to wake up and dive right back into battle. By early afternoon on February 1st, Kevin had been gaming for nearly 14 hours straight. Even for him, that was intense, but he couldn't stop now. He was in the middle of one of his best runs, dominating match after match, and right then he found himself in a critical game. His team was losing to a top-tier opponent. Kevin leaned in. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He dodged an enemy's attack and prepared to strike back. And then, something happened. Something very wrong. 3:40 p.m. later that night. At around 9 p.m., nearly 9 hours later, the cafe cashier had just handed a soda to another customer. She glanced around. For the first time that day, there was no line. It was time to start her rounds. You see, her job wasn't just checking people in and handing out snacks. She was also supposed to walk the floor, checking time records and making sure people weren't overstaying. It wasn't unusual. Many gamers got so sucked into their games they forgot how long they'd been there. So she grabbed her clipboard and began moving through the rows of players. 407, making the rounds. As usual, no one looked up. Every face was glued to a glowing screen. The clicking of mice and tapping of keys filled the room. One by one, she asked people how much longer they'd be playing, double-checked their paid time. Some were startled by her presence. Having been so deeply immersed, they didn't even notice her approach. Eventually, she reached Kevin's station. "Hey," she said gently, "your time's been up for a while." Kevin didn't respond, didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just sat there, eyes locked on the screen, hands on the mouse and keyboard. She tried again, louder this time. Nothing. No reaction. Growing frustrated, she reached out and tapped his shoulder. And the moment she did, Kevin's body slumped back slightly in his chair. And the cashier screamed. For 24 hours, Kevin had gotten exactly what he wanted, to be left alone, to game in peace. And he had, because no one, not one person in that cafe, had looked at him closely. But if they had, they would have seen something was terribly, horribly wrong. Kevin had died. Sometime during that final match, his heart had stopped. And in that dark, humming room, he slipped into full rigor mortis. while still seated at his desk, hands frozen mid-motion. When the photo of Kevin's final moment was released, it sent chills across the internet. Because in the image, he still looks like he's playing. But Kevin Liang had been dead for hours. Roughly 9 hours earlier, Kevin Liang had been fully immersed in a high-stakes match of League of Legends. His team was hanging by a thread. The opposing side was dominating, but Kevin had momentum. He dodged an attack and was gearing up for a final game-saving strike. He was locked in, focused, adrenaline surging. And in that very moment, his heart gave out. Kevin collapsed forward, silent, motionless, and no one noticed. For the next 9 hours, he sat in that same position, his hands hovering over the keyboard and mouse, rigid from rigor mortis. To anyone walking by, he looked just like every other gamer in the room, completely immersed. But Kevin Liang had been dead the entire time. It wasn't until the cashier, frustrated after multiple failed attempts to get his attention, tapped him on the shoulder. And Kevin gently rocked backward in his chair, his stiff hands jutting forward in midair, that she realized the awful truth. Kevin had died doing what he loved, gaming alone, uninterrupted. Later, his family confirmed he had pre-existing heart issues that likely contributed to the fatal heart attack. That afternoon, 48-year-old Daniel Herrera stood in the modern lobby of the Moxie Hotel in Portland, Oregon. He had flown in from Phoenix earlier that morning to speak at a regional conference later in the week. But for now, he just wanted to explore the city. Leaning casually against the front desk, he chatted with the concierge about places worth visiting. The concierge rattled off a few local hotspots and handed him a small city map. Daniel thanked him and stepped outside. As soon as he exited the hotel, Daniel's attention was pulled toward a growing noise. Honking, shouting, distant sirens. Just down the street, a crowd had formed in a wide circle. People had their phones out. Some were yelling, a few were filming. In the center of it all was a vehicle, and what looked like a police officer trying to control the scene. It was chaos, but Daniel couldn't make out what was actually happening. Still, like any curious bystander, he was drawn in. As Daniel began walking toward the commotion, he pulled out his phone and opened the camera. He started filming, snapping a few shots as he walked. The noise grew louder, car horns, people yelling, tires screeching. Still, the scene made no sense. Was it an accident, a protest, a confrontation? He edged closer. By the time Daniel reached the front of the crowd, he was only feet away from a police cruiser blocking the road. He aimed his camera toward the officer. Clicked. A single photo. What Daniel didn't realize in that moment was that what he captured in that photo would become the center of one of the most bizarre internet discussions of that year. Because something, or someone, appeared in the frame, and they shouldn't have been there. The man standing in front of Daniel Herrera, holding a gun, wasn't a police officer. Daniel had assumed he was. In the chaos of horns, shouting, and flashing lights on that Portland street, it seemed like this man was a plainclothes officer keeping things under control. But he wasn't. His name was Matthew Holloway, and just moments earlier, Matthew had pulled a gun during a violent road rage encounter and shot a 47-year-old man named Ryan Martin, point blank. That was the real scene Daniel had walked out of the hotel and into. And without realizing, he was now standing just feet away from the shooter. Camera up, focused, right as Matthew turned his weapon and fired again. This time at Daniel. The photo Daniel captured, the one where Matthew is staring directly into the lens, was taken seconds before the bullet hit him. Daniel was rushed to the hospital. Miraculously, he survived. As for Matthew Holloway, he was arrested at the scene and charged with murder. He remains in custody, awaiting trial. On April 5th, 2018, in the quiet countryside of northern Venezuela, 26-year-old Diego Navarro sat cross-legged inside a crumbling stone shack with a rusted metal roof. The structure was barely livable. Moldy dishes piled in corners, paint tubes scattered across the dirt floor. But for Diego, this place was sanctuary. It was his home, his studio, his world. The walls were alive, covered with his art. Dramatic portraits in deep reds and blues, eyes so intense they sometimes felt alive. On one wall, a man's face entirely crimson. On the other, a blue-painted woman, red lips vivid against the colorless wall. He always joked they watched him. Today, Diego was working on a final piece, different from the others, more personal. This wasn't just another painting, it was a release, a way to process heartbreak and grief. Because 2 months earlier, the man he loved, Emilio Vargas, the owner of this land, had vanished without a trace. Diego had met Emilio just a year earlier when he was living on the streets. Emilio offered him shelter, this small shack, and slowly that kindness turned into something more. A relationship bloomed, and for the first time in years, Diego felt safe, felt seen. But then Emilio disappeared, and the only way Diego knew how to cope was to paint. Just as Diego was admiring the final strokes of his tribute, a piece meant to capture Emilio's memory, he heard voices outside. It was strange. This was remote land. No one ever came unless invited. Then, pounding, Diego opened the door and froze. Police. He thought maybe they'd come with news, a clue, an update. But the officers pushed past him without a word. They scattered into the shack, grabbing brushes, canvases, sketchbooks. And then, one officer spotted the final painting, the tribute. He stopped, stared, and then ran outside and vomited. The painting looked abstract. At first glance, it seemed like stained glass, swirls of green, flecks of red, waves of deep blue. But upon closer inspection, authorities realized what it actually was. Because what Diego had painted was not made of paint. It was made from human remains, specifically pieces of Emilio. Later, forensic tests confirmed the shocking truth. Emilio hadn't disappeared. He had been murdered, and Diego had preserved him in art. The one man who made Diego feel whole now hung on the wall in a permanent state of tribute. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying horror stories. Thanks for watching.